You don't. You don't know that. Stop assuming bad faith without motive, dude. He didn't say that. He hasn't said this yet. You have been promising me for this entire video that Michael Knowles is going to make a definitive declaratory statement linking this person's identity as a transgender individual to the shooting as a motive. You kept telling me this. It hasn't happened yet. So, 1 point off from Knowles so far.
There's no acknowledgement, let alone consideration, of the actual positions that are put forward. And considering that he's already brought up that the person...
Hold on. Are you telling me that when somebody is conservative or is liberal, and then they make as part of a larger argument, they mention something that conservatives and liberals generally believe, they don't go into depth on every single reference and explain and prove it during a different argument? Like, it's like me talking about like how you shouldn't jump off the roof because you'll hurt yourself, and not taking the time to like explain gravity in scientific detail. It's like, no, he's a conservative. He's going to assume some conservative things when he's making other arguments. He's made the argument specifically before elsewhere, I'm sure. So again, this is mountains out of molehills here. It's one of the trends.
...person is trans, one can only conclude that this section exists to further insult trans people.
A little bit. This is a little bit true, because you're saying the word pretends, which is not. It's a little bit like that. I agree. Hold on. Let's go back to what he said.
So what does a transgender identifying person mean? Does that mean a man who's pretending to be a woman? Does that mean a woman pretending to be a man? Does that mean a woman who's pumped full of testosterone?
So the phrasing is a little bit mocking. I agree. Didn't have to be that way. But the point that he's making generally is that trans identifying person does not really specify exactly the nature of this individual is true. So again, half a point off for Knowles, I suppose, because it's more not mocking than it needs to be. But the kind of thing that he's getting about how trans-identifying person is not really specific in terms of like the nature of who this human being is true.
It's now become clear that obviously this person had lots of identity problems.
That's not clear at all.
It is if you assume conservative premises. Again, bringing that one back.
What's clear is that this person was transgender.
Right, and if you are conservative, that is the same thing. Okay? You can't claim that you don't want to debate the substance. You can't, like, he said at the beginning of this video he doesn't want to debate the substance. But then he also wanted to talk about journalism and narrative control and just kind of the rhetorical strategies. Right now, he is substantively saying that Knowles is being misleading because Knowles assumes premises that he doesn't, which is the substance.
Gotcha, bitch!
So, again, we've talked about this ad nauseum. Pretty soon I'm just going to start like giving you guys a look when he does it again. But yeah, again, not what you're supposed to be doing in this video, at least according to what you said at the beginning.
That's it. Not that they had lots of identity problems.
And the police chief is saying, yes, one of the theories here that we're pursuing that seems quite plausible, if not likely, is that transgender identity was a motivating factor.
Michael,
hold on a second. You told me, Mr. Rationality Rules, like a little bit earlier in the video, that he was making declaratory statements, that he was going further than the police chief did.
Gotcha, bitch!
Now, maybe he will later, but so far, he's not. So, we're going to keep waiting, going to continue to give him the benefit of the doubt, but...
Michael was putting words into the chief's mouth. The chief never said that it was likely. This is just...
He said plausible, and then he added as so in the English language, sometimes in the middle of a sentence where you're discussing something, you will put something called an interjection with 2 commas outside of it. And then this interjection is an interjection because of the 2 commas, but it's also an interjection in voice. He was saying that this police chief was saying that it was plausible, which it is because it's a theory that he felt comfortable voicing, if not likely. Now, again, there's two ways to interpret that. You could interpret that as him saying that the police officer is saying that it's likely, or because it's an interjection, you could also interpret that as Knowles saying, if not likely. Not speaking in the chief's voice, but Knowles saying that the theory, that chief says theory is plausible, and he says, if not likely, which is just his opinion, which he's allowed to have as a commentator. Which one of these interpretations is most accurate to his meaning? I don't know for sure. You know what I'm not going to do? Guess what? I'm not going to assume the bad one because I don't have enough evidence, because these are the basics of good faith interpretation.
Just an example of Michael slipping his biased narrative into a truthful statement.
No, it's an example of him giving his opinion alongside the news because he's a political commentator, because that's his job. Because that's what he does. He is not claiming to be purely objective. Like, it's just like a little rhetorical choice. It's like slipping a biased narrative into an otherwise truthful statement, or interjecting his opinion on a matter while also reporting the facts. Like, again.
I'm only going to say this one more time, sir. Calm down.
And?
So was this a targeted attack?
It was.
Do we know about a history of mental illness? Man or woman?
Don't know any history of mental illness at this time, but we are looking at that as...
We're not allowed to say anything on YouTube anymore. Let's just recount what the police chief said. The police chief said, this is a woman who thinks that she's a man.
No, he didn't say that.
That's what... So, actually, Knowles did the thing that he's doing. So, point off of Knowles again. See, I'm an equal opportunity hater occasionally. Knowles is assuming his premises when he's interpreting the cop. He is doing that. Because the cop says he's transgender identifying, and he says no history of mental illness, and Knowles thinks that this is a mental illness. So he says that, and his point is that, like, we should be treating transgenderism as a mental illness. That's what he's saying. So he's kind of translating what the chief is saying through his premises, which the chief did not indicate that he holds. So that's number one.
He spoke of someone, like most people, who probably isn't familiar with trans identification, which likely explains a lot of the misgendering. But he didn't say that this is a woman who thinks that she's a man.
Right, because he's translating the term for the audience, because he's making a point. The point he's trying to make is that he does think these are the same thing. So he was slightly imprecise to say so close in terms saying the chief just said X. What he really should have said was the chief said transgender identification, which really means this. And then he would have been more precise, and then he would have stayed out of the brambles. So fine on that. I guess he's right on
Misgendering. But he didn't say...
Also, misgendering, again, that's a substantive... That's a bit of substance in there. Although he's not really arguing it. However, I could... Hold on.
Wait a minute!
Because I was reliably informed that interjecting your premises in your speech without going into and explaining them at length while doing something else, like let's say giving a truthful news report, or in Mr. Rationality Rules case, trying to give a rhetorical analysis, I was reliably informed that was slipping a biased narrative into things. Good sir, how dare you?
Congratulations, you played yourself.
No, it's fine. He has his opinions. He's not arguing them, but he's going to assume them in his language because he's a human being. So he does it. Don't knock Michael for doing it, guy.
That this is a woman who thinks that she's a man. This is all Michael's daily warping again.
Followed by, we have no...
Warping according to you, again.
You know, that's just like your opinion, man.
Evidence of mental illness at this time. Not quite sure how to make sense of those two statements next to one another. Keep going.
It's quite straightforward, really. Like all people, trans people can often suffer from distress, low self-esteem, depression, and anxiety, much of which is caused by social isolation. You know, the factor Michael identified at the beginning. However, the chief didn't say that mental health was the determining factor, did he? The chief said he doesn't know at this point. And for what it's worth,
Michael didn't say that he knew it was the determining factor. He said that he's implying that he is implying that transgenderism is a mental health issue.
You haven't been paying attention.
Again, this is his premise. It's okay.
as of over 10 years ago, the American Psychiatric Association revised its diagnostic and statistical manual of mental disorders to no longer list being transgender as a mental disorder. The same is true of the NHS in the UK.
Okay, two things. One, he said he wouldn't debate substance. Conservatives do not accept this kind of appeal to authority to medical institutions. They think these institutions are somewhat ideologically captured, and in many people's opinion, they can make that argument in a colorable way. Doesn't mean you have to agree with it, just means that it's not completely off the wall. So this doesn't mean anything to a conservative. This isn't really debunking him. This isn't showing Knowles is lying. This shows that Knowles is a conservative and assumes conservative things, and also is prepared to deal with the implications of believing conservative things. One of those implications is saying that these institutions are wrong on this issue. Okay. And?
Again, just as homosexuality was once deemed a mental illness but now isn't, the same is true of transgender.
This is another, again, he's assuming his own premises, which is fine. But again, he told us that you're not allowed to do that, otherwise it's slipping in a biased narrative to an otherwise truthful statement, because that is a somewhat, that's a touchy equivalence there. Again, like a lot of the things he's criticizing Michael of, he's doing himself.
I will make that hypocrisy hurt.
What are the common threads here? People are saying this is so unusual because the shooters are usually these lonely white guys, school shooters. And it's a little more complicated than that.
Oh, so when yet another lonely white man shoots up a school, Michael will race to say that it's a bit more complicated than it seems. But when it comes to knowing basically nothing about this shooting, he won't offer the same courtesy simply because they're trans.
Wrong.
And he didn't say that. He hasn't said this yet. You have been promising me for this entire video that Michael Knowles is going to make a definitive declaratory statement linking this person's identity as a transgender individual to the shooting as a motive. You've kept telling me this. It hasn't happened yet. He has not done it yet. He said that, oh, look at, he hasn't said that yet. He said lots of things around that. He's asked questions about that. He has challenged some of what the chief has said on mental health. Like, he said lots of things around that idea. He hasn't actually declared that.
That it's a bit more complicated than it seems. But when it comes...
Almost as if he's being perfectly consistent and not coming to saying that it's... Like, he isn't saying what this guy is saying that he's saying.
Comes to knowing basically nothing about this shooting, he won't offer the same courtesy.
He does. He does offer the same courtesy. Because one, by the way, no definitive motive or link has really been established yet by anybody in term. And two, he hasn't made that link himself. Like, what are you talking about?
What in God's holy name are you blathering about?
Simply because they're trans.
And I never really thought the common threads are it's white people, or it's boys, or it's this, or it's that.
But you...
He is wrong about this. I do think there's something to be said for the fact that it's all men.
Would, if it furthered your political goals.
Come on now, dog. Come on, man.
You don't know that. Stop assuming bad faith without motive, dude.
That much is crystal...
Without evidence.
Crystal clear.
What are the common threads? History of mental illness, Common
That one's 100% true.
threads are social isolation. Common threads are psychiatric drugs in many cases. Not in all cases, obviously, but in many cases. The common threads are broken families. We don't know anything about this woman's family now. Maybe this woman's family is totally fine. We just don't know.
While Michael
seems like again, I'm sure he's going to try to tell me that was bad, but seems like very kind of hedging and cautious statements.
Is pulling these common threads out of his backside, let's speak about the actual threads.
Okay, if you're telling me that he's pulling them out of his backside, again, we're not supposed to be talking about substance. But if you're going to tell me that he's pulling them out of his backside, social isolation, many cases psychiatric drugs, history of mental health, you're going to have to show me that evidence. Maybe you will. We'll see.
School shooters are white and are overwhelmingly male.
Right, but the difference is that Knowles doesn't believe that there's any association between those common threads and behavior, which is probably true for the race thing, but is probably not true for the male thing.
But again, to draw a conclusion from these common threads would be foolish and dangerous.
Michael has not drawn a conclusion yet.
Deal with it.
And also it would be foolish and dangerous because those are inherent characteristics. I don't think it's actually dangerous for the men thing, but those are inherent characteristics. And Michael Knowles does not assume the premise that transgenderism is an inherent characteristic of the same type. Stop assuming your own premises when analyzing somebody else's argument. Stop doing it.
Stop it. Get some help.
He's going to keep doing it. I'm getting mad for no reason.
The question isn't what they have in common, but what factors cause them to carry out their atrocity.
That's true.
Michael claims it's due to mental illness, but how is he defining mental illness? Does he mean...
He defines it as something that he feels is a mental state that is incompatible with reality in this case. That's probably the answer.
All mental illness. If 1 in 8 people suffer from a form of mental illness, does he think that they're all equally likely to carry out a shooting?
What? What the fuck?
This is just like a straw man. Like, he's asking the question, so, kudos. He's not saying that Michael Knowles believes this insane thing. He's saying, does Michael Knowles believe this insane thing? Obviously, he does not believe this insane thing. To say mental health is a common thread in all of these issues does not mean that all people with mental health problems have the same risk. That logical move is not a logical move. It's I forget, there's a formal term, I don't remember. But the arrow doesn't go both ways, very obviously. And asking a question like that is very weird.
And this happens again and again and again. This happened not that long ago. A Colorado, also transgender identifying teenager, shot up a Denver area charter school.
And those agains are all Michael has. In the last 5 years, the United States has suffered...
Remember when we weren't talking about substance? I remember that. Feels like a long time ago.
2,828 mass shootings.
Those numbers are complicated. There's a lot... When you think of what a mass shooting is, not all of those shootings are what you think of when you think of a mass shooting. All of them are evil and horrible, but those numbers are complicated and weird. I invite you to dig into it. Try not to talk about substance, but just inviting you to look into that. Not all of those was like a school shooting, for example.
Of which 4 were carried out by trans people. I wonder, Michael, why didn't you bring up how many of the...
That makes sense because there's less trans people in America than anybody else. That's exactly what you'd expect, regardless of any potential existence or non-existence of behavioral differences. Just want to point that out. That's a weird stat to bring up.